This podcast and content posted by Dr. Judith Joseph is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast or website is at the user's own risk. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional diagnoses or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical or mental health condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Dr. Ekta Yadav is an award-winning scientist, doctor, and host of one of the top beauty podcasts in the world, Skincare Anarchy. On this episode of The Vault, Dr. Ekta discusses how skin health supports mental health and how conditions like acne and hair loss can severely impact patients in terms of their confidence, decisions, and mental health. Dr. Ekta's work is driven by a mission to democratize medical knowledge. It could be new acne, it could be new hair loss. They're exposing their brain to this new reality, right? But they're also building their confidence and addressing their concerns by working with dermatologists, with hair specialists, surgeons to address the concerns that they have. We can all be a part of the treatment team. She has conversations with the top dermatologists in the world on her podcast, and she talks about evidence-based science to support some of the products that she displays. We also talk about how healthcare professionals often struggle silently with high-functioning depression, and she discusses ways that she has overcome her personal battles. You won't want to miss this informative and empowering episode of The Vault. Dr. Ekta, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today in The Vault.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. I'm a huge fan, so thank you for having me.
Well, I'm a huge fan of yours, and I was on your podcast, and I was just blown away by all of the wonderful things that you're doing across different fields in medicine, particularly with regards to skincare and research. So I just wanted to learn a bit about how you were able to accomplish so many different things across different fields, because I know doctors are constantly looking for ways to diversify their portfolio.
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's interesting because I started in medicine and science when I was very, very young. My father is a scientist, so I came to America at the age of 5, and by the age of 7, he had me in a lab, working in a microbiology lab, a wet lab. I was doing, how kids do science fair experiments. I was doing the actual experiments and taking them to, my science fairs. And the judges were like, this is an actual thing. My first experiment was a fungus that was eating textile dyes. And they were like, why are you here? You should be, So it started early and the education started early. So when I went into the actual medical profession and got my training, my education, I think it was kind of my innate desire to be in multi disciplines, across the board. And so I always knew yes, I want to train in surgery. I went into general surgery for my residency and I loved it, but I knew that I could never leave research behind. And I think with that, it just happened naturally to where my research projects, I found them overlapping a lot. I was finding out things in different areas, like for example, neuro-oncology. I was doing neuro-oncology research, but then I realized, wait a minute, you can apply this to dermatology. You can apply this to lung physiology, So it was a lot of overlap that I think naturally came to light for me. And, that's how it happened.
Well, I find that when people are passionate about what they love, that it's easy to do it, or it's easier to do it. And, when I meet people like you who are doing so many different things and you have so many different passions, it feels very natural and authentic. How did you decide to start a podcast, and not just any podcast, one of the top beauty podcasts in the world?
Yeah, it's interesting. I get asked this question, and a lot of people are shocked when I tell them I'm not a dermatologist, because it really started from my needs as a consumer. I really wanted to learn about the skin. I wanted to know what works, why does it work, and what can we do in this industry to really merge true heavy scientific principles, And so when I was a consumer just looking for options, as a person of color, I always had problems with hyperpigmentation, obviously acne journey, all of these things. But the products I was buying were simply either not working or they were exacerbating my problems, So they were not solution oriented products. And that's when I kind of had a day where I got fed up and I cold pitched like, 200 brands and doctors and professionals. And I was very lucky that many of them came on the show. And so it was really a journey for me to learn. It was more from that space of like, I want to understand how the skin functions. How does it work? And then once I started to understand and got so much insight, especially from the amazing dermatologists, the plastic surgeons that came on, it really kind of sparked my interest in the research realm as well. So I went in that direction. But that's really where the podcast began, was this true innate curiosity for, what is it in skincare products that's actually worth investing in, from a medical standpoint.
It's so refreshing to hear that, like, even as a doctor, even as a researcher, we don't have all the answers, right? Like, sometimes my patients ask me about, like, oh, so, my heart doctor said this, and like my GYN said this, and like, didn't you go to medical school? And I'm like, yeah, but even as physicians, we only know what we know, right? So like,
Yeah.
we have to put ourselves in the shoes of patients, because we're patients too. And I love that your journey of wanting to know what was the best health decision for you, wanting to correct certain things that you weren't happy about, with your skin, that journey led you to wanting to help other people. And I find that type of passion really comes across as authentic, and also leads to, the individual becoming very successful. So,
Thank you.
as someone who listens to, you're welcome, as someone who listens to and speaks to experts all day long for several years, I'm sure that you end up finding out that there are some contradictions, right? Like, one expert will say one thing, and then on another interview, you'll hear another expert saying another thing. And that's what we as consumers experience too online, right? We hear all of these different skinfluencers saying things, and we don't know right from wrong. We don't know what to follow. What are some of the most common myths about skincare that you've heard that multiple experts have helped to debunk?
Yes, great question. So one of the biggest ones, and I was definitely on this side before I listened to a lot of great dermatologists kind of debunk this, was this idea of a 10 to 12 step routine. I loved skincare. I loved, using like the toner and the essence and the 5 serums. And I was just like, wait a minute, like it's not making that big of a difference. So when I started speaking to dermatologists, I actually asked them that question. I was like, do I really need that third serum in my routine? And they really simplified it and said, no, you need to have a great way to cleanse. You need to have a great supporting serum, a great supporting moisturizer or cream that you feel works for you. It doesn't weigh you down. So these kind of tips really help me kind of, separate the fluff from the real science. And a lot of that, I hate to say it, I have nothing against influencers. I think it's a great thing that we all share our journeys and, we share that with each other. But the dermatologists that are out here, especially on social media, and they're educating, they really help me, and coming onto the show onto my podcast, I was able to then ask them more questions. And so that really, really helped me a lot to understand, what does my skin actually need, from a cellular, molecular biology level, and, something that's actually going to help rather than just clutter my, my cabinet with tons of products.
I love that. I ask one of my previous guests this all the time, Dr. Doris Day. I'll DM her and be like, hey, like, should I put this on before that, or should I put this on before that? And she's like, she breaks it down, but it's really those simple type of questions that we need answers for, right? Because I don't know about you, but my bathroom has like so many products that I don't know if I'll ever get to use them, right? Because sometimes I get these samples, and other times, like, I bought something that I thought was going to help, and I'm like, wait, maybe I'm using the wrong thing. And so it becomes very confusing, even for a physician, right? So I
Yeah.
can't imagine what people who don't have, medical degrees or this type of training, what they go through when they're making decisions, right? It's all very, very confusing.
And
What are
then,
ways
yeah.
that, and what are ways that you've seen, like, other myths being debunked? Because one of the most common ones right now, especially on social media, is this idea that like, sunscreen is bad for you, that like it's toxic. As a researcher, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a big one, and I think it's been around because we have some very polarized studies out there, that are very dated. I try to, I kind of try to tell everybody that asks me, it's like if you're looking at any medical research, you want to make sure it's within 5 years, of the date that it was published, because things change very quickly, in the realm of research. And, with sunscreen, what I've noticed is that we have made great advancements, especially in the East, when it comes to the ingredients that are being used. I believe now they're utilizing things like algae, to really have these wonderful UV filters that we never knew about before, And so when I look at sunscreen and the whole like controversy around it, I noticed that it's a lot of fear mongering that's taken place. And most of that has stemmed from this idea that, if you apply sunscreen, you leave it on your face all day and keep reapplying, it's going to seep into your bloodstream and then go into all of the organs of your body and deposit there. And those are some things I keep hearing, and I'm just like, why did you, where did that begin? Because the skin barrier is a very, like, it's a tough thing to get across. It's kind of like the blood-brain barrier in some ways, because it's very hard to cross it. And so I think a lot of it has been fear mongering, and it's been fueled by these very, very old research speculations, rather, I should say, not even findings, speculations, because sometimes when we're reading a research study, people love to write in the conclusion or in the discussion section, hey, this is what we think is the result of this or whatnot. And unfortunately, consumers who might not have a medical background, they'll look at that and say, no, this is definitely it. This is going to cause cancer or it's going to do something terrible to me. But we're not taking into account things like toxicology, drug dose, bioavailability of things in our bloodstream. None of these things are being discussed. And so I think it's a kind of like a gray area that we're not addressing, as a medical community sometimes. I feel that way. And I think that consumers would benefit a lot if we put that out there more, kind of like flood the system with the facts and hopefully get rid of this myth. Because I don't think I've never seen real data that supports that sunscreen causes cancer or that it goes and deposits in your liver, or, all of that. I've never seen it. So it's baffling to me as well.
Yeah, and something that I've heard across the years was that people who are darker don't need sunscreen, and that's also not true. So tell us about the different needs of people who have darker pigment in their skin. What are their specific needs compared to those who don't have as much melanin in their skin?
Yes, that's a great question. And I think it's very important to address this because for many, many years, people did not understand that different skin types and because of melanin concentrations in your skin, it's going to have different needs. So, for example, hyperpigmentation is at the forefront for richly melanated skin. And that is one of the primary reasons you want to be up on your sunscreen. You want to be utilizing sunscreen every day because the hyperpigmentation is actually more prominent. It also shows up more prominently, and it's harder to get rid of. And so, keeping that in mind, if somebody has more melanated skin versus somebody who does not, they can probably, the benefits of sunscreen are there, but now you're also using it as a preventative measure for that hyperpigmentation. Another thing is something like keloid scarring. In populations with highly melanated skin, keloid scars are one of the toughest things to combat, and a lot of this, I have a general surgery background, so I saw after like, a procedure, many patients will end up having these terrible scarring, terrible scars, and they always ask, how can I get rid of this? But it's unfortunately, science has no answer for them. So these are things that really do impact, skin of color more so than Caucasian skin. And we are not really addressing it. We're kind of putting everybody in a bubble. And so, I really think that a lot more education is needed there. But if I were to really kind of sum it down in terms of just, the things that we see on the market, that hyperpigmentation focus is very, very important. And understanding also things like sebum production levels and oil production levels in our skin is important. Pigmented skin and highly melanated skin has a tendency to produce more sebum. That is just the natural physiology. And so when we're looking at the products that are geared towards balancing those skin types, we want to use very specific ingredients, very targeted ingredients to help with that balance. And this also feeds into, concepts like the microbiome and how, the microbiome species in our skin are kind of being balanced. And, it's a very big question, but there needs to be a lot more focus, I think, in this area and understanding that.
Yeah, and I love the connection between skin and mental health and confidence, because you're absolutely right. I've had patients over the years who've had really significant scarring, and they were told, well, there's really not much we can do about that. And yes, people are beautiful no matter what, because your inside, that's what really determines true beauty. But at the same time, we don't want to not validate people's concerns when they are impacted by scars and the way that they look, because that's the reality of the world, right? So I've seen that happen where people experience these shifts in confidence when they have scarring that they really can't do anything about, or they feel they can't do anything about. Or if they have other conditions like hair loss, severe acne, because, in a perfect world, we would say like, oh, don't judge a book by its cover, but that's not the reality. So what are some other like common instances where you've seen skin and hair health really impact someone's self-esteem and their mental health?
Yes, great question. And I think this is across the board in many medical disciplines. From a surgery standpoint, I can tell you after I've seen a lot of trauma cases, so my focus was always trauma. And there were so many cases where people were coming in for some severe injuries, like crush injuries, and really bad GI bleeding or just something very severe, right? And you would think the focus for that patient would be fix this, fix my really bad situation that I'm in. But so many times after post-op, the question I would get is, well, I have a rash right here. I have bruising right here. Can you help me with that? They weren't concerned about, normal functions that you would look for post-op. They were more concerned about, I don't want this on my body. It's almost like they were ashamed that they had surgery. And so that to me was, even in my training, I was always taken aback by that because I thought the questions I would be asked, would be about their recovery and all of these things. But people are truly impacted by, if even if it's a little rash or a lot of bruising or something, that's what they focus on and they want to get rid of it because they don't want the outer world to perceive them in in certain ways, in certain lights. And so I've seen that many times in many different cases. There was specifically one I remember. It was a mild case. It was in my training, and as many of us know, chickenpox is a disease most of us get, when we're very young, and so at that age, it's not too bad in terms of the lesions. But if you get it later on in life, when you're 16, 17 years old, the lesions are very prominent and they're all over your body. And I had a patient who she had it, at a very late age, and we were more concerned about the actual impact it's going to have on her health because it can really hurt your spleen, it can hurt your internal organs very badly if you don't manage it well. She was more concerned about, well, I just want these to go away. It looks like cystic acne, and I just want it to go away. And it kind of broke my heart to see that because she was in tears, she was upset, and there wasn't an answer I could give her except just wait, they're going to fall off, it's going to be okay. But I mean, I just remember her consistently asking me those questions of, the skin related questions rather than anything else, even though we educated her on the other aspects, like, make sure you don't play any contact sports, make sure you don't do, all these things. She wasn't really concerned about that.
And unfortunately, a lot of healthcare professionals are not as empathic about that. They're like, well, at least you survived, right?
Yeah.
Like, at least you're not dying. But, I think we really have to listen to our patients. And when they say, I am concerned about this, we need to incorporate that, right? Two things can be true. As professionals, we can say, well, we're concerned about that. You're concerned about this. We're concerned about that. But let's put both as a part of the treatment plan, right? Because then our patients are more likely to follow the treatment plan that we have, prescribed if they feel included, and they should be a part of the treatment plan as well. And with regards to the work I do in therapy, I'll start building up their confidence using things like mirror affirmation so that they get exposure to whatever this new look is, right? It could be a new scar. It could be new acne. It could be, new hair loss, but they're exposing their brain to this new reality, right? But they're also building their confidence and addressing their concerns by working with dermatologists, with hair specialists, with surgeons to address the concerns that they have. So we can all be a part of the treatment team because we all
Certainly.
need to feel heard and valued and validated. I
Certainly.
always ask my experts, what was a time in their lives when on the outside everything looked great, they were thriving, they were shining, people were admiring them and saying, wow, like you have it figured out, you have it all put together. But you knew on the inside that things weren't that great and you were going through challenges. And how did you get through that period in your life?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me this because when I had you on Skincare Anarchy, I kind of wanted to pull you aside afterwards because this was a big thing I've dealt with in my life, and you were the first psychiatrist I felt like would understand. And I want to share this because I've never really talked about it before. When I was in medical school, it was my second year, and I had been with somebody for 10 years. We were engaged, we were going to be married. I was away, I was abroad for my studies at the time. I got a phone call right before my immunology final, and he took his life. And I had no idea that this was going to happen. There were no signs. I mean, he was struggling with mental health, and I knew that. And so when I went away, we had an understanding, but I never thought it would come to that point. And this was, I got a call from his dad explaining to me what happened. And the next day, I woke up and I went and took an immunology final and I aced it. And I came home and I still had not processed what happened. And I think even to this day, if I'm being very honest, I don't think I've fully processed that. This was the closest person in my life. And I think that, and we had spoken about this earlier. I remember, when you were on Anarchy, is that, in training years especially, we're told as medical professionals, just do what you got to do and let's keep moving. Keep moving forward. Let's keep going. And we don't really get to address these major life things that happen. And so for me, I think I just kept going, in my career. I just kept moving. And even now, years later, I still have these like flashbacks and I have days where I'm like crying and I'm upset because I never processed it. I never took the time, and even now that cycle of, we're professionals and we have to put on a tough face for the world, it still exists day to day. And so, yeah, I think for me, that was the most impactful thing from a mental health perspective for me, and dealing with that. And I'm still dealing with that in some ways. It's been years, but yeah, very difficult.
Thank you for sharing that. And what are ways that you've tried to process it? How what are ways that you've coped with getting through something that difficult?
Yeah, to be honest, it's hard to pinpoint specific things I've done. I think most of them have been geared towards making peace with the good memories I had and focusing on them. For a long time, I was focusing on all of the bad. Like I went through a phase of just, like kind of denial and anger. I guess it's the stages of grief, some would say, but after a while, I started to focus on, well, he taught me a lot. This person taught me a lot in my life, and I chose to focus on that. And it gave me a lot of, I think, motivation because it really actually educated me about mental health. I mean, seeing what he went through, I learned so much. And actually, when I went into my training, when I had my psychiatry rotation, I went abroad because I thought the US system was not serving people well enough at that time. And so I went to the UK to learn about how is psychiatry done there. And that helped me a lot because it made me realize from an international perspective, there are a lot of things that can be incorporated in US medicine, that really does help people at this point that they're really struggling and they're not getting the medications they need properly. And that helped me a lot. It was very therapeutic to go through that understanding. In the UK, I saw that, for example, they have a lot better support system for these kind of patients. Like they have these almost like social workers that come with them to every appointment. They talk to them about their medications. They try to talk to the doctors, kind of like family, trying to understand what's the real protocol for them. And so when I saw that and that support, I was like, wow, there's a lot we can learn here, and there's a lot of hope because I'm not going to lie to you, when that whole incident happened, I felt very not only hopeless for my personal situation, but for the field of psychiatry as I had seen it in this country. I felt like people were falling through the cracks and we had nothing that would catch them like a net. And yeah, so I mean, I think for me, those kind of things help me a lot because they help me understand. One of the best things about science is it gives you knowledge, it gives you understanding, and it helps you cope, at least for me. And so I think for me, that was the best coping mechanism, was try to educate myself more and more and more. And I still try to do that.
Wow, thank you for that powerful personal story. And the picture of you hearing the worst possible news of your life and then getting up the next day and acing an immunology test. For those listening, immunology is one of the most difficult courses that you will take in medical school. There are so many moving parts. There are so many types of cells. There are so many processes you have to memorize. That just goes to show the culture of medicine, right? Like, we are told to not feel, to put others first, to get the job done no matter what. We are soldiers.
Yeah.
But what happens when the healers are unhealed? What will happen to our healthcare? And I do think that thinking about things differently from a preventative approach, right? Why are we waiting for people to stop functioning? Why are we waiting for things to be broken to do something? We need to be more proactive. We need to ask about how people are doing and not just take the word okay, at face value. We need to dig a bit deeper and really help our patients and prevent what's happening, or else this mental health epidemic will continue, and it's not just affecting patients, it is affecting our healthcare professionals. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for being on the podcast today. Your journey and all the work that you're doing is so inspirational.
Oh,
And where can we find you and follow you and continue to learn about all the wonderful things that you're doing?
absolutely. Thank you for the kind words. If anybody wants to follow my podcast, it's Skincare Anarchy, and you can find us on, Instagram, any social media outlet. We're still working on a website, so bear with me on the website. But my personal social media at Dermal Unity is where I post my own personal stuff, and you can also email me anytime, Ekta at skincareanarchypodcast.com. So it's the best place to find me.
Thank you. We'll be following.